I think right now there's a huge, huge spotlight on infection control.
Mm-hmm.
Less of a spotlight on how did we do to keep your room and bathroom always clean?
Right.
Because always, and Dion, you always say this, with one housekeeper for 8 hours, you cannot always keep a room clean.
It's impossible.
Exactly.
It's not possible.
And it's a lot of different disciplines in and out of the room nonstop.
And for anyone to believe that, they're delusional to think that one housekeeper on a unit, we have a unit has 40 plus beds, with more than half of the unit has 2 people per room, some of them 3 people per room. How is anyone going to manage that with multiple discharges during the day? It's impossible. It's not possible.
And is that question really important? Like, what do we need to know? Like, why is that question important to reimburse? Because all those scores lead to one big giant factor, and that is reimbursement for the patient's stay.
Well, I think the question is important, but I think the context of the question versus reality on the floor is not balanced. So the question is important. That is your room. Go ahead.
I think the question is almost just not important anymore. I think more important is validating, checking to make sure the room has been cleaned and disinfected, that the housekeeping staff are properly trained, that we are working to reduce cross-contamination across all the environmental surfaces. I think more attention needs to go on that, and less attention needs to go on the perception of cleanliness.
Well, that's my point exactly. I think the question is important, but is the question for the patient, or for the housekeeper or the supervisor? I don't think the patient should be given that opportunity to say, yes, my room is clean always 24 hours a day. No, it's impossible.
If you look at the data, there's been no significant movement of the needle and the national industry average for 20 years.
So do you think rewording a question might make a difference?
No, the question is not necessary to the patient. It's are you satisfied with service? Were you satisfied with your housekeeping service? Not, is your room always clean? It's never always clean.
That's why I said how you question. And I learned this actually doing the PhD program. I learned that how you ask questions make a big difference. Instead of it being a yes or no question, and my accent is trying to come out, it can actually be a question like, how likely?
Yep.
Most likely.
Yeah.
Likely. Like that way it's more.
But even so, look at the grading system, right? You have always, you have sometimes, you have usually, and you have never. Never is 0, sometimes is 0, usually is 0, and always is 1.
Usually is not 0.
No, but our grading system usually is 0.
So maybe
sometimes it's 0.
Create that grading system.
It's ridiculous. I think whoever came up with that sat down and came up with the graph that I'm going to show you guys tomorrow. So
the question is, it's old, and Pressgani needs to come up with a better mechanism to help us gauge customer service, customer satisfaction. there's Leapfrog that asks a lot of important questions and collects a lot of data about mortality, about antibiotics before incision, things that really matter to the outcome of the patient. I think Press Ganey is way less important than it was before the start of the pandemic. That's what I think.
Well, I think
Dion, have you all, you know what a great question would be? A great question or a great way to approach kind of push and change for that is think about using things like Kahoot. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Kahoot, to ask your staff. Like if you give them randomized surveys and have them answer questions, you can collect data that way. And it's actually free. It's free for you to use. And you can use it to collect data. And then once you have the actual physical percentages of how the staff responded or how they feel or how they believe they're perceived, you can use that data and take it to management.
You know, the data comes from the patients.
Right, it has nothing to do with the staff.
So, you know, Dr. Carr, you should probably, what I did is I Googled HCAP survey and Press Ganey, and then you'll see how they collect the data, who they send the surveys to. Basically, you get admitted to the hospital, and you go home, and within 3 to 5, maybe 7 at the most days of being discharged to home or to a nursing facility, you get a survey in the mail. And I guess, you know, out of thousands of patients Cornell discharged, we only got about 350 to 400 surveys a month.
And one of the things that I've learned also, Dion and Liz, one of the things that I've learned is that people only usually complain when they have an issue. Not too often do we call and give feedback when we're satisfied. So that could be a reason why those results are skewed as well. Even with us, like if I go to I've made it my duty now to also give feedback when I have excellent customer service, either low end or high end. But usually if we're going like, I had a really good time at that local TJ Maxx. It was a really good experience. We never really complain or fill out any information regarding our visit. But if we have a poor experience, we usually document that. So that can be something
that's very true
to think about. You're more likely to give feedback when you're not happy.
Or when you're extremely satisfied.
Correct.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, I don't know how to get off my car speaker system, but I think we just did a whole nother podcast.
Yeah, I'm going to eat my dinner.
Dion, I have to say you have to wear a different color than you're wearing today because
I know. I know. I'm gonna see if I.
You blend in with your wall.
Yeah, I know.
All right. Well, I'm gonna go watch the news thanks to Dr. Carr, and I'm gonna see this horrible. Yes.
All right,
we'll
guys.
talk
This
to you
was
tomorrow.
a very successful test.
Good night.
Thanks, Dion.
Bye.
All right. Good night, everybody.
Bye. That was part 1 of Clean and Comfort. Enjoy part 2. We're getting ready to begin. Thank you. Enjoy. Welcome back to Clean and Comfort. Today, we'll be discussing COVID and our guests who are entering our buildings and how do we manage good customer service with enjoying COVID. Liz, welcome. Dr. Carr, welcome.
Hi, Dion.
Welcome. How are you? Thank you.
So, Liz, anything to add?
Well, first, hi, Dion. Hi, Dr. Carr. It's nice to be chatting with everybody. And again, we're calling in from remote locations. So I think it's really important that we set the expectations with our staff, with our team members, with our environmental service professionals. And especially because we now have to wear masks. So the universal language of service and of greeting someone, which is a smile, can no longer be seen. So we have to make sure that we are really explaining what our team members do for patients, that we have warm and welcoming body language, and that we actually visit patients more often in their room and in the emergency department to make sure that we're meeting their expectations.
Talking about body language, you're so right. But I beg to differ, because just yesterday I was smiling behind my mask and someone said, "Oh, you're smiling." So even with the mask on, they could see that I'm smiling. Maybe because I have big cheeks.
Well, I think that when people see, your around your eyes crinkle up and, and your mask move a little bit, that they can tell that you're smiling underneath for sure.
Yep, for sure. I want to share what we discussed yesterday. I'm sharing my screen, and we are talking about communication. What we talked about: communication, body language, tone, and it says here that 7% of our communication is based on verbal communication. 55% of communication is based on body language, and 38% is based on tone. As I said yesterday, the more and more I look into this and I talk about this diagram, I think it's wrong, because I don't think my tone, or I don't think my body language, if I'm a housekeeper, that 55% of my body language communicates to the patient, especially if I'm holding a mop and pulling trash bags or different things in a room. And I don't see how 55% of that has anything to do with communication. I would say that the verbal piece, when it comes to housekeeping and being into the room, should be up higher than around 55%. What do you guys think?
I'll let Dr. Carr take this one.
Oh, I was actually thinking it depends on what moment that you are interacting with the patient. For instance, I know that as the cleaning crew, that the goal is cleaning the room, but obviously there will be some interaction prior to that where your body language and your tone and your vocals will play a very important part over what you say verbally. So again, it depends. As myself, thinking of someone who has been a patient in the hospital maybe 1 or 2 times in my lifetime, I do remember seeing and observing everyone who came in, and their body language is important. For instance, if your back is turned, just simple gestures as smiling or waving are also a part of body language. So those things are important. I'm not sure from what aspect they're expecting the cleaning crew to respond using body language, but I think if we're just talking about the communication piece, but not necessarily actually working when you're producing the service, but actually just communicating with the patient, that those percentages could be accurate.
At 55%? So yeah. I do this every single day, and most of my communication is verbal in the room. Most of my communication.